Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The NFL season is fast approaching, and I want to share my final predictions and some key questions and takeaways for every team. Now, you may be able to tell that I am coming off of a recent cold, so I apologize if my voice doesn't sound how it normally does. Allow me to explain how this is going to work this time around. I'm going to start with the NFC from the worst team to the best team, and I will also share some key takeaways and talking points that I just want to bring up. So let's start with the team I think is going to be the worst in the NFC, and that is the New Orleans Saints. I have the Saints winning 2 games. Now, I understand that this might be a bit of a contentious opinion. I know there are quite a few people who are actually quite impressed with the Saints this year, but I just don't see it. So, some things with the Saints that really bug me is, when is this team going to just commit to a rebuild already? They've been, when Drew Brees was there, even though he was getting to the end of his career and wasn't really looking like the Drew Brees that I am a huge fan of. Drew Brees is my personal favorite quarterback ever. In the Drew Brees years, kicking the money down and restructuring these contracts wasn't a bad idea. However, Mickey Loomis went a little bit overboard with it, even at the time, and Saints fans will tell you, oh, COVID is the reason we're in this money pit. And yes, COVID made it worse, but even without the cap shrink of that year, the Saints were something like $40 million over the cap. So I do not like the way this organization is currently being run. I do not trust the front office. I do not trust Dennis Allen. I like the Clint Kubiak hire. I think he has very high potential as a offensive coordinator in the league, maybe even as a head coach one day. But the way this roster is currently set up, their best defensive pieces, most of them are in their mid-30s at this point, on hugely bloated contracts. They lose good, young, talented players every single year. And I have no idea how they're going to pay Chris Olave or Paulson Adebo, or if they had an offensive lineman worth paying. Don't see how they could do it. So there's just a lot going on with the Saints that I don't agree with and I don't like. My second talking point for the Saints is Derek Carr. Derek Carr is very clearly not the player he was, and I see now why Las Vegas was so happy to be rid of him, and I don't know why the Saints gave him the money that they did. Derek Carr is not the guy, and you gave him this massive contract that you cannot get out of, that is just weighing the team down. So, at some point this season, do you start Spencer Rattler? Does he get any kind of look? I would like to see it myself. I think it would be worthwhile to give the kid a shot, even if the games are completely meaningless. But at some point, you have to realize that Derek Carr is part of the reason this Saints team is not going to be very good. It's not just the offensive line. It's not just the lack of depth at the receiver position. It is Derek Carr. And my final question for the Saints, and this is not as big as the first 3, is, are they going to trade Marshawn Lattimore this year, or are they hoping he has a bounce back, and are they going to move him in the offseason? I think they're going to try to move him at the deadline. They drafted Kool-Aid McKinstry, and I'm a huge believer in Paulson Adebo. I'm a huge believer in Alontae Taylor, even though I have no idea how this team is going to pay either of them going forward. But I love both of those guys, and I think a McKinstry, Adebo, Taylor secondary is incredible, and I think that makes Lattimore completely redundant now that he's 29 and can't stay healthy. But how do you trade him with that contract, of course, is the big question. I have the Saints going 2-14 as the bottom team in the NFC. let's move now to the second worst. Number 15 in the NFC, I have the New York Giants. Now, I think this team is agreed upon by a lot of people that this team is not very good. And there's good reason for that. And a lot of it is Daniel Jones, of course. Daniel Jones, honestly, is a lot like Derek Carr, where he's just not the quarterback that they paid him to be. The one reason I have the Giants winning one more game than the Saints is that they play the Saints, and I think they're better. Very, very slightly. I think they have just the slightest bit more talent defensively than the Saints do, in primary part because the guys on the Giants aren't in their mid-30s at risk of dropping off a cliff at any moment. Let's get to my three big talking points for the Giants. Number one is Malik Neighbors is absolutely crazy. Malik Neighbors is going to be wide open all day, and he's going to get to watch so many balls fly straight over his head because Daniel Jones cannot throw the football at all. So that's going to be a bit disappointing because I'm a big believer in Malik Neighbors. I wasn't when he was coming out. I don't think I'd have to go back and watch some of my mock draft videos because I don't remember every prospect. And I didn't watch a lot of Malik Neighbors. Watching him in practice in the preseason, this kid is special without a doubt. This is probably the best wide receiver Daniel Jones has ever played with. This is the best wide receiver the Giants have drafted since Odell Beckham. I'm not willing to say that he's better than Odell Beckham because I think a lot of people forget just how good Odell Beckham was as a prospect and then when he came into the league. But Malik Neighbors is going to be a huge, huge contributor to this Giants team going forward. I don't expect his rookie year to be anything super special like a lot of people do, just because of how dysfunctional Daniel Jones is as a quarterback. But Malik Neighbors definitely should give you hope. My second question for the Giants, sort of keeping in line with Malik Neighbors, is do the Giants trade Darius Slayton? Darius Slayton has been the leading receiver for the Giants for the last 3 years. 700 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns every single year in the last 3. He's produced enough. I don't think he's a super special player, but if the Giants transition to this sort of rebuild philosophy and try to make the team better before going and getting a future franchise quarterback, whether it's Carson Beck or Shedeur Sanders or whoever that might be, do they start moving some of these pieces? We saw this offseason they didn't bring back Xavier McKinney. I think they could have signed and traded him if they really wanted to. Maybe there's other pieces that they could move, but I think the big one is Darius Slayton because he is on the last year of his deal. I don't see a world where he gets extended now that Malik Neighbors is there. Maybe they want to move in some of the young guys to come in and take some of those snaps. But we'll see. If he does get moved, I think the best place for him to go is Atlanta. I think that would be an incredible move to put the Atlanta Falcons on top of their division quite comfortably, just to have that option. And my final question for the Giants is, of course, are they going to cut Daniel Jones after this season? Is this the last year of Daniel Jones? The Daniel Jones contract, despite what you might think, is actually structured in a way that they can get out of it pretty easily next year with not a huge hit to their overall numbers. But it's still a question mark, of course, of whether or not they're actually going to go and do that. I think they should. I think it's the smart move. But again, I don't work in the NFL, so that is entirely up to the people that do. Now we can move on to number 14. At number 14 in the NFC, I have the Seattle Seahawks winning 3 games. This might also be an opinion that I get flamed for in the future. maybe in the not-so-distant future, as I'm sure the comments will be very opinionated. But let me tell you why I don't particularly believe in the Seahawks. Number one is their defense. I know they went and drafted an edge rusher who I quite liked. I don't remember if it was Braden Frisk or Jared Verse. It might be Jared Verse. I know they drafted an edge rusher. I apologize for not knowing that off the top of my head, but I want to see some significant improvements defensively before I start to really believe in the Seattle Seahawks defense, because otherwise the group they have on the edge to me is just not very convincing. I know they extended Leonard Williams, but I don't really, I don't think he's a superstar. I think he's just kind of okay. But yeah, the defense, I need to see that be better. The second thing with the Seahawks is the offensive line. The offensive line in Seattle has at times looked decent, but other times it has looked completely disorganized. So I want the offensive line to be much improved before I put any stake in the Seahawks at all. And the final point I have with the Seahawks is that I don't believe in the Geno Smith Cinderella story. Yes, it was a great story. It was a great narrative that Geno Smith took over for Russell Wilson and had that great first year with Pete Carroll. But last year, his second year in Seattle, he slowed down. He didn't put up the same numbers. He didn't look as flashy or as exciting. And I think a lot of the work that made him look the way he did was because of Pete Carroll and his coaching. And he's not there anymore. The Seahawks have a new coach who is a defensive-focused coach. And I'm sorry, but I don't believe that bringing in a completely new system, a completely new philosophy is going to be good for Geno Smith, because we have seen him plenty of times before this where he just wasn't good. And I don't think that 1 year as an above average player is enough. I think the Cinderella story is over for Geno Smith, and that's why I have the Seahawks as my 14th team. Moving right along then to the 13th team in my NFC with the Carolina Panthers. I have to say this, I don't believe in Bryce Young. I know there are plenty of people out there who are going to find any reason other than Bryce Young as a player to excuse the performance he had last year. I understand why people want to do that. This guy was a former number 1 overall pick. There's a lot that comes with that. There are huge expectations. And the other reason people want to make these excuses is because they're right, okay? The coaching was god-awful. The management, the culture, the front office, all of it. Everything they're saying about Bryce Young's circumstances is correct. The problem with saying the O-line sucked, the weapons sucked, all of this, is that this is not a unique situation. It is not unique to Bryce Young. It's not even unique to his draft class. We've seen it with Kyler Murray. We've seen it with Justin Herbert. We saw it with Trevor Lawrence. Odds are, if you're drafting in the top 5, your team's not very good. So, with all of that being said, Bryce Young is just not the guy. A lot of people are going to compare him to Kyler Murray because they're built similar. Kyler Murray is so many leagues better than Bryce Young as a passer, as a scrambler, reading the defense, at stepping into the pocket in every way that you want your quarterback to be. Kyler Murray is better. And I think these next few years for Carolina are going to be hell. So I don't expect much from the Panthers, but I think they will be enough to be marginally better than the Saints or the Giants. The second thing with the Panthers, kind of is a massive red flag to me, is I have no idea who is going to make plays on this defense. And yes, I know J.C. Horn is an incredible player, and he was hurt for much of last year, but, he's back now, and that's one guy. but I don't know if he's going to be 100%, if his injury is going to be, nagging him or anything like that. But Brian Burns is gone, Jeremy Chin is gone, Derek Brown is still there, and he's pretty underrated, but again, it's like that is just one guy. So there is a definite possibility that this could be the worst defense in the NFL next year. I could totally see that happening, but I think there are just so many question marks defensively with this team, and it's to a point actually that I look at this roster and I start to question, did I make the right decision not putting these Panthers lower on the list? But I'm not going to go back through it. I'm just going to go with what I have. And is there a huge difference between 2 and 4 wins? Not really. And then the final question I have for the Carolina Panthers is, are the additions on the offensive line enough to, bring this team up from where they were a year ago? Because they brought in Robert Hunt on a huge contract from Miami. And I will admit, I don't know a lot about offensive guards. It's taken me the last year and a half to learn tackles, so it's probably going to take me another year to learn guards and centers. Is Robert Hunt enough? I don't know. I think they also brought in a guy from Seattle. There's no way they can be as bad as the guys they had last year. I don't think they made enough moves to make a huge step forward, especially with Bryce Young at quarterback. So the Panthers are going to need a long time to really get better. That's why they are number 13 on the list currently. The team I have at number 12 is the Washington Commanders at 5-12. Now, I've been saying for a very long time that Jaden Daniels was my personal 4th quarterback in the draft last year. I think there's definitely a lot of potential in Jaden Daniels. He is immensely talented. He's a phenomenal athlete. With Washington, I think one of the biggest question marks is, are Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, and Jaden Daniels a good fit for each other? I really don't think so. I was a huge believer in Kyler Murray coming out of college, and Jaden Daniels reminds me a lot of Kyler Murray, way more than Bryce Young does. And I saw what Cliff Kingsbury did to Kyler Murray, and I fear that the situation that Jaden Daniels in is detrimental to his career. Just having Cliff Kingsbury as his coach, I don't know if I'm alone in believing that or not. I really think this is a disaster waiting to happen. I think we're about to see a misuse of someone's talents that should honestly be a federal offense at this point. My second worry with the Commanders is, who is the second option? Because obviously Terry McLaurin is wide receiver 1. They traded Jahan Dotson. Who's next, right? I don't think it's Zach Ertz. I don't know how he even has a starting job in the NFL anymore. I think Zach Ertz is completely washed. Olamide Zaccheaus, I think, is also there. I think they brought in Noah Brown from the Texans recently, so maybe, he's had a couple of games where he can really step up, and maybe that is the answer. The second receiver position in Washington, I think that's a huge barrier to their success. And then number 3 is the offensive line. The offensive line in Washington last year may have been the worst in the entire league. One of the big question marks for Jaden Daniels as he was coming into the league was, of course, his pressure to sack ratio being one of the highest we have ever seen in college and in the NFL. I think that is a big worry with the Commanders, is, are they, is the offensive line that they have, is it enough to protect Jaden Daniels? And I personally don't think that it is. Now, as we move to my 11th position, we're going to see a massive jump in record, and it might be to a bit of an unrealistic extent, and that is the Vikings at 8-9. So we're jumping 3 entire wins here from 12 to 11, and in my last video I know I had the Vikings at 5-12, which they would have been 11th anyways. Hear me out, okay? I want to give every team the benefit of the doubt as much as I can, and I actually think if this team was starting J.J. McCarthy, they'd be incredibly scary. But with Sam Darnold, I think it absolutely tanks their probability to win. And so in this scenario, I have Sam Darnold starting 5 games, and then after the week 6 bye, they switch to Nick Mullins. Because as much as I believe Kevin O'Connell is one of the most underrated coaches in the entire NFL, and I do believe he will get the best out of Sam Darnold, I don't think the best of Sam Darnold is very good, because Sam Darnold is not very good. And that leads me to my first point with this team, is that I think Kevin O'Connell is so clearly the future of this franchise. I think you could sign him to a 15-year contract. I don't think that's unreasonable. I really don't. And watching this team in the preseason, I don't know how you can look at it and go, yeah, this is a team that is tanking. This is a team that's not going to be competitive for a long time. This is a team that so clearly wants to win a Super Bowl and has just been screwed by injuries. Watching them in the preseason, it didn't matter who their quarterback was. And I understand that the preseason doesn't matter, right? But at the same time, the preseason can tell you a lot more than people are willing to admit. And the biggest thing it told me about the Minnesota Vikings is that this is a team that is incredibly well coached. And that matters. That really does. So if I were a Minnesota Vikings fan, I would be begging the owners to sign Kevin O'Connell to a contract extension tonight. So that's the first thing. The second thing with the Minnesota Vikings is the secondary. Now, what you might not know is that the Vikings last year, in the last 8 games of the season, their defense played like a top 10 unit. It's shocking, I know, but it's true. The problem that I foresee is not the defensive line, despite there being a massive talent vacuum there. It's the secondary. And I don't know if Stephon Gilmore signing as late in the season as he did is good. I don't know if the back-end talent is enough. I just don't know. So I think there's a lot to be desired with the secondary on the Vikings, and I wonder if that'll hold them back or not. I have faith that their defense can at least be top 15 this year, because they added just so many pass rushers, right? You can never have too few of those. And I'm a big believer in Dallas Turner too, so I think their pass rush is going to be incredible. And if you have an incredible pass rush, that can make up for a deficient secondary. But at the same time, I think it is definitely something they need to think about. And the final point, which I guess I should have brought up first, actually, is it too late for Sam Darnold? And what I mean by that is Sam Darnold is 27 years old. He's the same age as Joe Burrow. I think he might even be a month younger. But the problem is, are we really going to just have this assumption that Sam Darnold can suddenly be something that he's never been in the NFL to any degree? Yes, he has the physical tools. There is no denying whatsoever that Sam Darnold has the physical tools to play quarterback in the NFL. The problem is he has none of the mental. He's awful at reading a defense. He's not super accurate. He has this tendency to just make a decision before the play is over, before the play even starts, I should say, of who he's going to throw to, and that bites him a lot. And I think that truly is like the root of a lot of his problems. So those are my takes on the Minnesota Vikings. And if everything goes right, if they only start Sam Darnold for the first 5 weeks and then they switch to Nick Mullins, I do think they can be a mediocre 7-10, 8-9 team. And that's why I have them where I do. In the 10 spot, I have the Arizona Cardinals also going 8-9. And the Arizona Cardinals, in a lot of ways, remind me of the Vikings last year, where the defense might be the worst in the league. But they could be a top 10 offense, which again is kind of like the Vikings last year or 2 years ago, where there are just so many holes on the defense. But the future, the first point I have is the future for the Arizona Cardinals is absolutely to the moon. I think Jonathan Gannon, I had my doubts about him as a coach, but I see the vision now. I understand why everybody in Arizona seems to love this guy. So absolutely, I truly do believe the future is incredible in Arizona. They absolutely do need to find some help on the defensive line. You know, if not for the Panthers, it might be the worst defense in the NFL. I think they could just go and sign Yannick Ngakoue and ask him to start. That's the end of it. You know, they could ask him to start, and I think it would make a difference. But yeah, the future, incredible. Could be a top 10 offense. Defense needs immediate help, and this video is already getting long, so I might have to speed up some of these other ones just to cut down and make this video that's not 3 hours long, even though I could absolutely talk about the NFL for 10 hours straight, and maybe one day I will. In the 9 spot, I have the Philadelphia Eagles also at 8-9, and the biggest thing with the Eagles is I have to wonder if the late season collapse they had last year, which was in some ways it was honestly historic how bad they were after the great start they had to the season. Is that collapse indicative of other issues in Philly? Could it be personnel issues, locker room issues, coaching issues, whatever it could be? That kind of collapse doesn't just happen. So I am skeptical of the Eagles this year. I understand that there are a lot of people that believe in the team. If the collapse they went through at the end of last year is indicative of other issues, my second thing that I have to wonder is if Nick Sirianni even survives another year of disappointment. Because yes, the Eagles, 2 years ago were in the NFC Championship game, and you know, this year they collapsed the way they did, and if that happens again, I do think questions need to be asked about whether or not Nick Sirianni can take this team to the Super Bowl, where they want to go. And then finally, is a pretty simple question, is did they fix the secondary? Because the secondary was a huge issue even when they were winning games. They got rid of Marcus Epps. Thank God. Marcus Epps might be the worst safety in the entire league. But did they do enough to immediately rectify the fact that Marcus Epps is terrible, that James Bradberry is not at all the player he was? He was so bad. They switched him to corner, and now I think he's on IR. They switched him to safety. So James Bradberry is a safety, and when that happens, it usually means the corner is washed, but we'll see, I suppose. For the 8th seed, just missing the playoffs on tiebreaker, I do have the Atlanta Falcons. And this is another team kind of like the Saints, kind of like the Eagles, where I disagree with some of the public opinion. And that's mainly because I don't trust Kirk Cousins coming off of an Achilles injury like a lot of people seem to. And again, it falls under my philosophy that I have to make a lot of assumptions with that. And the more assumptions I have to make, the less likely I feel something is to happen. So with Kirk Cousins, yes, he had an incredible year last year with the Vikings. And if he had stayed healthy, I don't have a doubt in my mind that the Minnesota Vikings could have gone to at least the NFC Championship game, and Kirk Cousins probably would have been MVP. But because that is the path the NFL was on, the football gods could not allow that at all. And that's why Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles. But I have to make the assumption that Kirk Cousins, coming off of an Achilles injury at 36, in a completely new offense with a brand new coach, who I believe is a rookie coach. I don't know. I don't know much about Raheem Morris, so someone will have to correct me on that. But either way, it's a new system, new personnel, new everything, and he's coming off of a major injury. So I don't think this year is the year to buy into the Falcons. Next year, I think, is that year, kind of like with the Cardinals and the Vikings. It's sort of like I understand why people want to believe, but maybe hold off again. The other thing that really matters is Michael Penix is absolutely going to be the guy at some point. He looked great in preseason, which was shocking to me. I do have to admit, because I was not a believer in Michael Penix at all. But everything I've seen from him in practice and training camp, and the progress he's made to transition to the NFL level, I am quite surprised by. I will admit that I might be wrong about Michael Penix, and I still think it was a terrible pick. Don't get me wrong. I don't understand the philosophy at all. I think they could have gotten away with just drafting him and starting him anyway. But Michael Penix is obviously the future in Atlanta, so I don't know how long they can hold him off. Kirk Cousins' deal is really only a 2-year deal, kind of like Daniel Jones. But again, I think that's more for next year. And then the final thing I have written down for the Falcons is that it's a very weak division, the NFC South. Of course, it's the Panthers and the Saints, who I think will both be picking in the top 10. And then the Buccaneers, who we'll get to later. But I'm not sold on Atlanta for this year, but next year I think they could improve massively. Now, getting to the first playoff team in the NFC, I have the Green Bay Packers as the 7th seed with a 10-7 record. And I think the biggest question for the Green Bay Packers is pretty obvious, and that is, did Jordan Love prove enough to be worth the contract they gave him? I'm going to say something that might be a bit controversial, and I'm going to say that no, he did not prove enough. I think he definitely proved enough to be paid. Don't get me wrong, I think he absolutely proved that he deserved an extension. I just don't know that he proved enough to be given the money he was given, because he's either the first or second highest paid quarterback in the league right now, which is ridiculous. And, Green Bay is fine cap-wise. Their offense is super, super young. They don't have any receivers to pay right now. They don't have any tackles to pay right now. They don't even have an edge rusher to pay right now. So, money-wise, I don't think they really care, but in a year or two, maybe the contract will look more like Daniel Jones. And I know it's kind of sacrilege to say. We'll see. The only time will tell with that contract, of course. And then the other two things is not as major, is how is the wide receiver distribution going to work, right? Is it going to be, 2 wide receiver sets, 3 wide receiver sets, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, who's 1, 2, 3, Dontavian Wicks even, though I don't think he has a shot to be wide receiver 1 or 2. I think he will be the rotation guy. And personally, I think Christian Watson should probably be traded, but that's for another day. And then the other thing that I wrote down for the Green Bay Packers that is more of a future thing, and a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me on this, but I wonder if the Green Bay Packers can keep up with the NFC North. And what I mean by that is I think the NFC North is trending in a way that they're going to be the best division in football at some point. And somebody has to be the weak link. And I honestly believe it could be the Packers for the next 2 or 3 years. And that's not to say that they're going to be an absolutely garbage team. It's just, I think they'll maybe be closer to like a 9-10 win team than the other 3 players in the NFC North. And the reason for that is, yes, the offense is super young. defensively, though, they've got a lot of guys that are aging out. And I think they have to play this really, really well over the next 2 years to stay ahead of the pack and to get to the position that they want to be, which is obviously to be perennial contenders. But everyone in the NFC North needs to do this. It's just in different ways. Everybody in the NFC North right now has their quarterback. It's just a matter of ironing out. The Vikings need defensive tackle. The Bears need an edge rusher. They have Montez Sweat, so they really only need the second option. They kind of need D-tackle more, but, same difference. And the Bears also, or not the Bears, the Lions also kind of need a D-tackle, but it's mostly secondary. But, this, that, and the other thing, obviously. But the Green Bay Packers, 10-7, 7th seed. The way I see it, anyone who makes the playoffs is a contender. I might get flamed for that, but you got to make the dance first and foremost. I don't care how you get there. You got to make the dance. Anyway, that was a lot of fluff. Moving on. For my 6th seed, we're staying in the NFC North, actually, which is kind of why I got off trail there with the Green Bay Packers. But the Detroit Lions are my 6th seed with an 11-6 record, only one win more than the Green Bay Packers, and this may be shocking to a lot of people because I know a lot of people have the Lions winning the NFC North, but you'll see what happens and why they're the 6th seed and not the 2 seed, but we'll get to that in a minute. So with Detroit, my biggest question for Detroit is the secondary. Okay, their secondary was almost as bad as the Eagles last year. It was really bad. And I think they drafted, who was it? They drafted that one guy they traded up for it. Now his name is slipping my mind. I know he's supposed to be really, really good. Not Kool-Aid McKinstry. I think the other Alabama corner, I think, is who they traded up for. Oh, man, that I can't remember. But that guy that they traded up for, and then I believe they drafted Ennis Rakestraw Jr., who I love Ennis Rakestraw Jr., and I think I even mocked him to the Lions at one point. But they have a couple of rookies. More than a couple, actually. I think they have 3 rookie corners that made the 53. And then they have a couple of veterans in there that are not super special or anything. But I think the secondary will get off to a slow start, especially because they play in the North and they have to go against all these great receivers. So I think that is sort of a knock against them. But I think there will be clear improvements to that secondary throughout the course of the year. It's just not going to be immediate. The second thing I have for Detroit is obviously the offense is elite. I think the Detroit Lions could have a top 5 offense. I think anybody in the NFC North could have a top 5 offense. Yes, that includes the Vikings, even with Sam Darnold for 5 games. I think the NFC North is going to be an absolute light show this year. And then finally, and this I think could be the most crucial point, is has Dan Campbell learned from his mistakes in the NFC Championship game? They should have just kicked that field goal, man. They should have just kicked that field goal. But the Lions are definitely on the right track. I think they probably should look to invest in a backup quarterback that they can develop past Jared Goff. And I don't remember how long his extension is. It might be 3 years. It might be 4. But I do think the Lions need to start thinking about life after Jared Goff at some point, especially because, it worked for the Packers. And we can just ignore the fact that Jordan Love sat behind a future Hall of Famer after Aaron Rodgers sat behind a Hall of Famer and, whatever, this, that, and the other thing. But clearly, if it worked for the Packers, it can work for the Lions too, right? Anyways, moving on. For the 5th seed in the NFC, I have a 13-4 team. So that tells you anything about how playoff scheduling and seeding works. So San Francisco. Now, some of these takes that I have written down here are already outdated, and that goes for San Francisco as well, because I had written down here that the Trent Williams holdout is worrying. Word for word, that's what it says. But they extended Trent Williams. So I'm glad I have the 49ers not falling super far off a cliff like some other people did in their prediction videos that came out weeks ago because of the Trent Williams thing, because I would look like an idiot. Now, the two big things for the San Francisco 49ers, sorry, I don't know why I said it that way, is can Kyle Shanahan win when it matters? Okay. I have not been watching the NFL for a very long time. It's not even been a decade yet. I started in 2016 when I was invited to a fantasy league. Okay, that's how I got my start in sports. Like, straight up, didn't care about sports at all until that moment, which is lucky for me because that's when I got to watch the 2016 Cavs versus Warriors finals. But that's a story for a different day. But every year that I have seen Kyle Shanahan make it to a Super Bowl in any capacity, he has flundered, man. I don't know what it is about that man where he can't seem to put it all together in big games, but it has to be asked, right? I know they both got contract extensions, both Kyle Shanahan and Sean Lynch in San Francisco both got contract extensions this offseason. Can Kyle Shanahan win when it matters? And then the second big one is this the final shot with this current core of players for the 49ers? And that would be, the Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, Trent Williams core that they've got going on. And then defensively, Nick Bosa. I can't name any of the other players right now. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and I am losing it. But, is this the final shot for this core? Because they have to play Brock Purdy at some point, and then they have to move assets. I don't think they're going to move any major pieces offensively. They might move Deebo Samuel in a year or two. Who knows? But is there going to be some kind of massive change to this organization when Brock Purdy's contract needs to be renewed? Maybe that's a question for next year, but I'm asking it now. So, moving on now to number 4. At number 4, I have the Dallas Cowboys with a 9-8 record. So again, if you got something to say about how playoff seeding works, there you go. Now, I have actually seen recently a lot of people start to doubt the Cowboys, and I can't say I blame them. Just with the nonsense going on with the Micah Parsons contract, the Dak Prescott contract, formerly the CeeDee Lamb contract, and Jerry Jones as a GM is not fantastic. So I understand the doubt, and I believe it. I can't say I deny the doubt around the Cowboys, and if you bear with me a second, I gotta find my notes for the Dallas Cowboys. Here we go. So the big question on my mind for the Dallas Cowboys is, will Dak's contract be a distraction for this team? I think that's a very valid question. If I were Dak, I would be incredibly fed up with how the organization has handled his contract to this point. I don't know how he hasn't started a media storm about it, but I think it's a very important question to ask is just, will this be a problem for the Cowboys this year? The second thing I have to wonder is if the run game is going to hold the offense back, because they lost Tyron Smith, which I don't think is actually the biggest loss in the world to their O-line, but it has to be mentioned. And then they signed Ezekiel Elliott. They drafted Rico Dowdle's the old one. They drafted a running back. I can't remember his name, but they have Rico Dowdle, who I'm not impressed by. And they signed Dalvin Cook. And I think it's the worst running back room in the entire NFL. So how does that the run game, limit them. And then finally, how does Mike Zimmer change the defense? Will it be positively or negatively? There's been a lot of media news about Mike Zimmer lately. That's pretty interesting. So, what goes on there with the defensive side of the ball? I think, he brought in Eric Kendricks, who he made look like an all-pro at times. I think the Cowboys defense is going to look crazy. I think it'll be really good, but I think there are definitely some major questions offensively with Dak's contract and the run game. So I'm not super sold on the NFC East as a whole, as you can probably tell, but somebody's got to win it. At the 3 seed, winning the NFC South, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 10-7. I think honestly this could go either way, with a head-to-head tiebreaker for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Atlanta Falcons. But the major question for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is Baker the quarterback they think he is? Obviously, he was good in Cleveland, and then apparently he had to play through an injury to his shoulder in his final season there, and he kind of got thrown under the bus so they could sign Deshaun Crosby. And then he kind of struggled in Carolina, but who doesn't? And he bounced around a little bit. He had a great game with the Rams. Then he went back to Tampa Bay, and he sort of found himself again, and he looked pretty good at times. And I think it kind of got swept under the rug because of all the other quarterback extensions this offseason, but he was re-signed by Tampa to not insignificant money, not world-breaking money, but he was signed to a decent contract. So if they're spending the money on Baker, they need him to be the guy they think he is. My other question for Tampa is, are they really good enough to compete with an NFC that is very clearly on the rise? There are a lot of teams that have improved a lot this offseason. The Rams, the Lions, the Packers, the Bears, the Vikings, if they had McCarthy, I think would be, absolute world beaters. But again, maybe this is a question for next year's Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then finally, how can they improve the run game? I think improving the run game would be huge for Tampa. It wasn't the best last year. I don't think Rachaad White is anything super special. They have some O-line problems. I know one of their guys retired. I don't remember who, but I think Tampa does need to improve the run game. And just maybe improving the run game just means running more. I don't have the statistics to tell me how often they ran the ball last year. I probably should have those, but that's just what I think of Tampa Bay. And number 2, I have the Chicago Bears. They have the same record as the Lions, but they win on tiebreaker for division record. They go 4-2. I have the Lions going 3-3. I think, kind of like with Atlanta and Tampa, you could honestly swap these two. I don't think the same applies to the Packers. I think the Lions and the Bears are both better than the Packers right now. But here are the big questions for Chicago. Number 1, will Caleb Williams live up to expectations? Important question, isn't it? I think he will, personally. Caleb Williams was always the number 1 guy coming into the draft, and there was no doubt from the moment the Bears secured the number 1 pick that they were going to get Caleb Williams, and I can see why, man. Oh my goodness. There exists a world that might come to fruition where Caleb Williams carries Matt Eberflus to a Coach of the Year title, and I don't think we can allow that to happen. That would be the darkest timeline. But Caleb Williams is special, man. Caleb Williams is the real deal. And I honestly think, and this might sound crazy, but I honestly think if the reports are right that Keenan Allen, is overweight and kind of struggling in camp, I honestly think the Bears offense will be better with Keenan Allen at 3 and Rome Odunze as the second. Just because I think Rome Odunze is really, 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 really good. And Keenan Allen, he's still got some juice left in the tank, but maybe you want to limit his touches and make sure he goes up against, nickel backs and linebackers and stuff like that. But that's not really that important to what I'm trying to say. Secondly, has the offensive line improved? Or was it Justin Fields' fault that he was constantly getting sacked all the time? Who knows? I like the right tackle that they have. Broderick Jones, I think is his name, that they drafted 2 years ago. I think has a lot of potential to be really good. Obviously, he wasn't phenomenal last year. Their guards were in question. I think their center was one of their worst players, but again, that could just be because Justin Fields was terrible. And finally, the final question is just the defensive line in general. Montez Sweat obviously came over and he had a great year last year, but you know the rest of that defensive interior, there's a lot to work out there. But if all of that can hold up and they can play like a top 10 defense like they were at the end of last year, kind of like the Vikings, the Bears and the Vikings, despite being 7-10 teams, at the end of the year, the last 8 games, they both had top 10 defenses, which is kind of crazy. But if the Bears can keep that up, which personally I think they can, despite, having to make a lot of assumptions there, well, not really a lot, but there's definitely some assumptions you have to make for that to happen, but I do think it's possible. I think the defense did get better. I think the Bears might have the best secondary unit in the NFL, even though I think their safeties are kind of a liability, just because I think Jaquan Brisker is not very good. But Kyler Gordon, Tyreek Stevenson, and Jalen Johnson could be the next Legion of Boom. Honest to God, they could. They really, really could. I think that is a crazy group of corners. So you don't even need an elite safety if you've got that. But that is number 2. Let's move on to the NFC conference winner. Okay, so my number 1 in the NFC is the Los Angeles Rams. If you've done your math homework and you've been doing the process of elimination as we've gone through this, you'd know that. And I understand that this is another take that goes against consensus, but I think the Rams are really good, man. I think they're really, really good, even without Aaron Donald. Right. The main question I have written down here is, how will the defense change without Aaron Donald? Aaron Donald is a generational player we're never gonna see. Well, I shouldn't say never, but for the next 10 years at least, we're not going to see another Aaron Donald. And that's a huge blow to the Rams defense. And obviously the secondary is definitely in question. Can Trey White stay healthy? Is he the player that he used to be? All those kind of things. But with the Rams, I think their defense will be just good enough. I think it'll maybe be like 18, 17, 16, somewhere between 15 and 20. Maybe at times it can be a top 10, top 12. And the way I see it, and I mentioned this in a previous video, is if you have a top 5 offense, it can carry a mediocre defense, right? If you have a top 5 defense, you need to have at least a top 15 offense, because they don't work the same way. So even if the defense is kind of mediocre, I think this will be the number 1 offense in the league. I could honestly see it where it's like the Rams, Chiefs, the NFC North. Of course, that then leads me to my next 2 questions is, what on earth is going on with Kyren Williams, and why is everyone freaking out that he's on the depth chart as the kick returner? Is it because they don't believe in Kyren? Is it because they believe in Blake Corum? Are they doing more of a 1-2 punch thing there? Does it really matter? I don't think so. But I think it is an interesting question and a storyline that we should watch. And then the final question is, can Stafford stay healthy? Right? I think that might be like the biggest barrier to me getting this right is, can Matt Stafford just stay healthy to drive the offense to be as good as I think it's going to be? We'll have to see. So anyway, yeah, those are my NFC predictions. We're already an hour into this, so this is going to be a long video, even though I'm trying to be rapid fire. Um, yeah, this is going to be a long video. Strap in. The second half is about to begin right after this. Of course, I'm only kidding. I'm not sponsored, obviously. But as we get into the AFC now, my bottom team in the AFC is, I think, everyone's bottom team in the AFC, the New England Patriots. Now, the Patriots, one thing that I truly do believe about the Patriots is that Drake May should be starting, and I understand why he's not. It's because of the second point, and that is the New England Patriots might have the worst offensive line I have ever seen in my life. It is truly, truly incredible how terrible that offensive line is, and that's why they're not starting Drake May, is because they don't want to risk their asset. But Drake May is the future of the franchise. I think he's going to be very good, and I think he needs to start. And my final observation about the New England Patriots is a question of whether or not Gerard Mayo is the guy. Can he steer this ship? Is the Belichick way still viable in 2024? I don't think so. And I hold the conspiracy that Gerard Mayo was always supposed to be a one-year throwaway. I never believed that Gerard Mayo was the future of this franchise. I think it's just Robert Kraft going, I need someone to be there. I need a bot. I need someone to fill the position so that I can find something later. Maybe Lane Kiffin, something to develop my my franchise quarterback. So that is the New England Patriots, 3-14 in 16th place in the AFC. In 15th, with a much better record than 15th in the NFC, I have the Indianapolis Colts. And this might be another one that I get a lot of flack for, but that's okay. This feels like another team where I just have to make way too many assumptions before I can believe they're good. And one of the big ones is, will Anthony Richardson adapt to the NFL? I know we saw him a little bit last year. We only saw 4 games out of him, but I was not convinced. Yes, the athleticism is there. There's no denying that he is a top-level talent. But what I've seen of him in preseason and in practice and training camp, it leaves quite a bit to be desired, I think. So I think he still has a lot of potential. I was huge on him coming out. So I'm hopeful for Anthony Richardson to adapt and become a great NFL player. I just don't think this year is that. I think he needs time to recover from his injury and to improve his game. So the second one is, will Jonathan Taylor stay healthy? We haven't seen that for a while out of Jonathan Taylor, and I think if he's not healthy, that kind of diminishes the entire team. Jonathan Taylor has been, in the past, he has been a very dynamic player, a very unique player, a guy that you don't just see on every other team. And if he's not healthy, then I really do think you lose a lot of options, a lot of possibility with that offense. So I don't know what the team looks like if he cannot return to form, but we'll see. And then my final observation about this Colt team is that I do believe in Shane Steichen as a coach. I wasn't, I mentioned before with the Cardinals, I wasn't huge on Jonathan Gannon, who was the other former Eagles coordinator, but Shane Steichen is a guy that I really do believe in. If anyone can get Anthony Richardson to become the guy that I think he can be, I think Shane Steichen is that guy. But again, for this year specifically, I think there's a lot that the Colts will have to overcome to be better than pretty not great. So that's why I have them here. At 14th, I have the Denver Broncos. And I think this is another one where the Colts and the Broncos are pretty interchangeable to me. Um, I don't think either team is going to be super good. I think they have the potential to become good in a year or two, but for this year specifically, I'm just not sold on either of these teams. With the Denver Broncos, I have written here, the important questions are, what is Bo Nix's ceiling? I wasn't sold on Bo Nix in the draft process. I'm not sold on him now. I think he has a very average floor as a starter. Obviously, I think he will be a starter for a decent amount of time in the NFL. It's just a matter of, I don't think he's going to be a high-level starter. I think he's just kind of a filler guy. He's not Daniel Jones bad. That's pretty obvious. But finding a comparison for him is pretty hard too. Because guys like him don't stick around super long. So it's really a matter of the second point, which is Sean Payton actually a good coach? Obviously, he had Drew Brees for a long time, but then, he had Derek Carr for a year and Jameis Winston for a little bit. And, he went through other quarterbacks, and he really didn't change anything about them. He had Russell Wilson, and it seems to me that Sean Payton is a guy that tries to make people work into his scheme instead of building a scheme around his players' strengths. Granted, of course, Bo Nix is pretty good at doing what Sean Payton likes to do, which is a lot of short yardage, low risk, high volume kind of stuff. So those two together, maybe they can get something more out of Bo Nix than just an above average starter, but it's really dependent on how good is Bo Nix actually, and I don't know if it's very good. And then finally, my third question for the Broncos is, how good are the skill players? Because I like Courtland Sutton, I really do. I think injuries have really hampered his career, which is a shame. But after that, I don't really believe in anyone they have, from their running backs to their tight ends to the backup wide receivers. I don't think it's a very good group of skill players. So there's a lot about the Denver team that you just kind of have to assume. So that's why they're here. For 13th, I have the 7-10 Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers are an interesting case because a lot of people will tell you that Mike Tomlin has never finished a season under 500, but he has had a lot of seasons directly at 500, so take that as you will. My big concerns with the Steelers is definitely at the quarterback position. I don't think Russell Wilson has it anymore, and I've never believed in Justin Fields. I don't think he will ever get a starting job again unless it's due to injury. The other question I have to ask is whether or not this is the end of the Mike Tomlin era in Pittsburgh, because I don't think they're going to fire him. I think it would take a lot of bad drafts and bad years to have the Steelers fire Mike Tomlin, but I think if this is another year where the roster just isn't good enough, I could definitely see um, Mike Tomlin retiring, kind of like Sean Payton did with the Saints before his contract was over, and then he agreed to come back after Denver traded him. A similar situation like that I could definitely see for Mike Tomlin. And then finally for the Steelers, I wonder if they'd be willing to go out and get a receiver at this stage. I know they tried to get Brandon Ayuk and that fell through, but maybe they go for a guy like Darius Slayton. Um, 'Cause I really think the Giants should just move on from Darius Slayton at this point again. As I talked about before, he's 27, 28. He's on the final year of his deal. Just get some picks, and if I were the Giants, I would try to go and trade him to either Atlanta or the Steelers. So the Steelers are 7-10 and 13th in the AFC. Number 12 might be a very controversial one because number 12 for me is a 7-10 Miami Dolphins team. And I can already hear your comments. And the thing is, I don't know that Tua is worth the contract he was given, even less so than Jordan Love, because Jordan Love got a lot of money. And I understand why people wanted to extend him. As I mentioned before, he proved he was worth an extension. I just don't know if it was worth that money. Tua, I believe, is worth that money even less. Obviously, he's being paid less than Jordan Love and Trevor Lawrence, but I still would not have given him that amount of money. I don't think Tua is a very good quarterback, and I think that will be very evident if the Miami Dolphins are faced with any kind of adversity, especially if Miami does make a playoff run this year. I know they're not going to go anywhere because Tua is terrible in the postseason. He's terrible in cold weather games. There's a lot going on there where I just don't believe in Tua. And my second question for the Miami Dolphins is whether or not they can keep this core together for very long. They have Tua, who is a top 5 quarterback money wise. Both Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, I think, are making top 10 wide receiver money. They might Jalen Waddle might have been bumped down a little bit after the extension to Brandon Ayuk and Amon-Ra St. Brown over the offseason. I haven't checked in a while, but they're both making a lot of money, and they lost Robert Hunt. They lost Andrew Van Ginkel. They lost a lot of pieces this offseason, and I don't think that gets talked about enough. So that's why I'm not super sold on the Dolphins this year. That's why they're number 12. And number 11, we're kind of sticking with this same sort of theme as the last few selections. And at number 11 is the 7-10 Raiders, and a big reason they're here is just because of questions at quarterback and coaching to a degree. Because I don't know how good Antonio Pierce really is as a coach. He's obviously loved by the player base, and that has value, but when your quarterbacks are Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew, how much can you really do? It's not great. And some other notable off-season or in-season storylines that could develop with the Raiders is, first and foremost, will Davante Adams stick around? It's very obvious that Davante Adams has been unhappy with the Raiders ever since they traded his buddy Derek Carr, which was the only reason he went to Las Vegas in the first place, was to play with his old college teammate. And he's not happy. And if I were the Raiders, I would trade him personally. Send him to Atlanta, send him to the Steelers, send him wherever. But I think it's very important to ask whether or not Devontae Adams is going to be on this team after the bye, or not after the bye, after the trade deadline. Another thing I worry about with the Raiders is the run game. I'm not sold on Zamir White at all. I'm less sold on Alexander Madison, even as a backup, and I don't believe the Raiders are good, even if the defense is really good, which I think the defense will be very good, despite the fact that they went and willingly signed who I believe to be the worst safety in the entire NFL in Marcus Epps. I think their secondary is still probably fine because, unlike the Eagles, they have guys who actually have experience tackling. So that will make up for the fact that Marcus Epps couldn't cover an insurance policy. But even if the defense is good, is it good enough to carry a bunch of bad quarterback play and an offense that I think will be completely anemic? But we'll see, I suppose. For now, I have the Raiders in 11th place. At number 10, I have an 8-9 Tennessee Titans team. And again, we're in this territory where it's just a lot of question marks about quarterback. And that's true with the Titans as well, where my big question for them is whether or not Will Levis can take the second step to be a proper franchise quarterback in the NFL. I think there is precedent for it. I think it's possible. I was higher on Will Levis than most the year he was drafted. I think he definitely has potential. I think going to a new scheme and having a rookie head coach is not the best path to success in that regard. But it's definitely dependent on whether or not Will Levis can move up the ladder and level up his game. Secondly, with the Tennessee Titans, I'm not sold on their receiver group. I don't think Calvin Ridley was worth the money that they're giving him. I don't think he was worth even half that. I don't think Calvin Ridley is very good. I think DeAndre Hopkins is only getting older. And he is definitely slowing down a lot. And after that, it is dire. And then finally, with the Tennessee Titans, is I think the defense, even with the signing of L'Jarius Sneed, I think the defense still has a lot of holes. I think, it just feels like a team to me that is several steps away from being true contenders. And I have them with the same record as the Vikings, but I do think the Vikings are a better 8-9 than the Titans are. So take that for what you will. Number 9 finally sees us escape quarterback purgatory with the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers to me feel like a very boomer bust team, and therefore they will end up completely mid. I have them at 8-9. I think a lot of people are counting them out too much. I think a lot of people have them much, much lower than I do, which I think is kind of ridiculous. I think there's a very easy path for the Chargers to have the best O-line in the AFC. They have Rashawn Slater. They just drafted Joe Alt. They're very clearly trying to protect Justin Herbert. And, somebody will have to step up in the receiver room, obviously. I don't know who that will be, but somebody will have to step up. That's number 2. Number 3, and finally, is how will Jim Harbaugh, change or unlock different aspects of Justin Herbert's game? Is he going to use him more as a running quarterback with this refurbished offensive line? Who knows? But I think the Chargers for sure are being counted out a little too much. So they're my number 9 seed. At number 8, and my final playoff runner-up, is the 9-8 New York Jets. Now, the New York Jets to me feel like another team that a lot of people just make excuses for no reason. Um, and again, with the Carolina Panthers and Bryce Young, I understand why they do it. Because they're right to a lot of degrees, where it's like, yes, the Jets have had terrible quarterbacks, and they haven't stayed healthy, and this, that, and the other thing. But it's like at some point you have to find the core of the issue, and I think the core of the issue is Robert Saleh. I don't believe Robert Saleh is a very good coach. The defense is obviously very good. Jermaine Johnson, Quinnen Williams, or not, Quincy Williams, I think. Or maybe they're both on the Jets now, I can't remember, but they have a great defensive tackle. I like their edge rushers a lot. Their secondary is really, really good. I think DJ Reed is criminally underrated. Their safeties are kind of, not the best, but who cares? It's safety. And then CJ Mosley is still in the league, and he's still incredible. But again, I think Robert Saleh is on his last legs, and I can definitely see a world where if this is the case and the Jets do go 9-8, I could see a world where Rob Saleh gets fired. Maybe I'm too pessimistic about the Jets because I think they're an organization that just cannot ever get anything together. And people say it's not their fault, but history repeats itself all the time, and we just let it happen. And then finally, I think we're making too many assumptions about their additions to the O-line this offseason with Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, who are both coming off of season-ending injuries. And Tyron Smith has not played a full season in 6 years. So I think we're making far too many assumptions that this O-line is going to be immediately better, because they added 2 guys that have extensive injury questions. Tyron Smith more than Morgan Moses, because Morgan Moses has stayed healthy for the most part. It's just last year where he had a pretty significant injury. And speaking of significant injuries, Aaron Rodgers is 40 years old, coming off of an Achilles, and everything that I watched of him this offseason and in training camp, I don't think he's the quarterback that he was at all. I think he's lost a step for sure, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if the Jets come out and absolutely suck week 1, because Aaron Rodgers was a huge distraction in the offseason. There's rumors flying all over the place that he's not a team player, he's not a leader. Whatever else the media wants to say, I don't really care about that. I care about more what I've seen with my own eyes, and what I've seen with my own eyes is a lot of people in New York that are going to be very disappointed, I think. But again, I want to give teams their best possible outcome, and I think even with the possibility of a mostly mediocre offensive performance from Aaron Rodgers, I think the defense is good enough to make up for that. So that's why they're here at number 8. At number 7 is a team that I've really flipped the script on, and that is the Jacksonville Jaguars, 10-7, making the first wild card spot. In my previous 2 videos, I had them pretty low. I didn't really give them a lot of credit. I still think there are some significant questions, especially defensively. Their secondary is better than I thought it was when I went and looked at some numbers. They just paid that one guy a whole bunch of money, but their secondary is definitely better than I thought it was, and that was one of the main reasons I was so low on them, is because I don't trust their pass rush nearly at all, even with Trevon Walker and their D tackle, I forget his name. But even with that, a similar question has to be asked, like with Tua and Jordan Love, is is Trevor Lawrence worth the money that they gave him? I think he is. I think Trevor Lawrence is a lot better than a lot of people in the media, especially the casual audience, will say. A lot of people are going to say he's a disappointment, and I understand that because he was a number one draft pick that was very, very, very highly regarded coming out of college. And those are extreme expectations. And I don't think personally he has lived up to those, but those expectations were kind of unrealistic from the get go. So I can't really hold that against him. I don't want to, at least. But it is important to ask that question of whether or not he was worth that contract. And then my final thing that I have to say about the Jaguars is Brian Thomas Jr., he's the real deal. Brian Thomas Jr., I think, is another guy I had in my mock drafts that I wasn't the highest on, but going back and doing research and really learning who he is as a player and watching him in practice and training camp, I've changed my mind a lot. I think he's going to be really good. I don't think he's going to be really good right away. I think it's going to take a moment, a couple weeks for him to adapt to the NFL and to be incorporated into the Jaguars offense. But after that, I think it's a green light, and he's just going to take off. So that'll be fun to see. But that is my first playoff team in the AFC, the Jacksonville Jaguars, at 10-7. In the second wild card spot, I have an 11-6 Cincinnati Bengals team, and I think this is a team where I might be a bit too high on them. I think I might be letting the past sort of dictate this prediction a bit too much. And that's not to say that I don't think they can be good. It's just I think I'm kind of going against my own rule and making far too many assumptions about the Bengals. But I like the Bengals, so I will point out that I might be biased because I am a huge Joe Burrow fan. I love Joe Burrow. But my main question is how does Joe Burrow's injury affect him as a player? This is an injury that is so rare. We don't have any idea how it might affect Joe Burrow's ability to play quarterback. So that's something we have to watch. And something else, as sort of a side tangent, is I've started to kind of wonder if Joe Burrow is the next Sam Bradford. Is this a guy who we're going to treat as one of the great what-ifs of the NFL if he can't stay healthy and misses out on all of this development and playing time because he just gets injured all the time? Obviously, Sam Bradford was a little bit different because all of his injuries were mostly leg related, and Joe Burrow hasn't really been that way. But still, could he be the next Sam Bradford? And then secondly, with the Bengals, is how long is Jamar Chase going to do this weird song and dance? I think it's completely ridiculous, personally, that Jamar Chase is asking for the money he's asking for, because I don't think he's better than Justin Jefferson. I don't think he's better than CD Lamb. I can't remember who else. Who's in third? Because Jefferson is 1 right now. CD Lamb is 2 contract-wise. This is all contract-wise. Brandon Ayuk might be 3. And I think Jamar Chase is better than Brandon Ayuk, but I think it's absolutely ridiculous for Jamar Chase to be asking for more than Jefferson and more than CeeDee Lamb. I think he's being really petty about that. But it's like, how long is he going to hold this up? He's got 2 years left on his deal, which is really another weird part of this case. because CeeDee Lamb's contract was coming to an end, Justin Jefferson's contract was coming to an end, Brandon Ayuk's contract was coming to an end, but Jamar Chase still has 2 years left. It doesn't make any sense. And finally, for the Bengals, how is the run game going to change without Joe Mixon involved? Granted, Joe Mixon definitely was slowing down, but I don't believe in Zach Moss at all. So I think the running game could be an issue in Cincinnati. But for now, and for the rest of the season, I have the Bengals at 6. Number 5 might be my biggest benefit of the doubt pick for these predictions, and that is the Cleveland Browns in the 5 seed at 12-5. Obviously, we all know their defense is amazing, but the big question mark is, can Deshaun Crosby return to the form that he had in Houston? Me personally, I don't think that's ever happening again. He missed 2 years of snaps. And, one of the big things about being a high-level athlete is repetition. You got to do it every single day. And for 2 years, he didn't do that. It's his own fault, obviously. I feel no sympathy for the guy. But I think it's just completely unrealistic to think that he's going to return to the player that he was. But if I am trying to do this in good faith and allow these teams their best possible outcome, even if Deshaun Warrant was able to be like Baker Mayfield last year, I think they could have a really good team. But we'll have to see, I suppose. So, the next question I have about the Cleveland Browns is, how will Nick Chubb's injury affect him as a player? One of the most gruesome leg injuries I've ever seen in the NFL. And a lot of people will point to the fact that he was squatting like 800 pounds or whatever it was shortly after his injury and be like, oh, he's going to be fine. And it's like, well, squatting doesn't really involve a lot of rotational movement in the knee like running does. So I don't really see the two as correlated much at all. It's a very impressive feat, don't get me wrong. I'm glad the guy is able to recover, but I still question whether or not they're going to miss him, because Nick Chubb has been one of the best running backs in the league since entering it. I'd put him right behind Christian McCaffrey. I think in a lot of ways he's been very underrated throughout his career. But if he's not the guy he was, then that's a huge blow to Cleveland. And then finally, with the Cleveland Browns, the question you have to ask is, how long is the defense going to hold up? Because defense in the NFL is much, much harder to hold together than offense. So if that defense slips even a little bit, even for a stretch of games, 4 or 5 games, somewhere in the middle of the year, it could get ugly. But I want to give all of these teams their best possible shot. So in the best world, in the best case scenario, the Cleveland Browns finish 12-5 as the 5 seed. At number 4, the first division winner, I have the Buffalo Bills at 10-7. I do think they will regress slightly. I think anytime you have Josh Allen, you will have a chance to win your division. Even with the loss of Stephon Diggs and some pieces defensively, Micah Hyde's gone, Tre'Davious White is gone. Even with that, I think having Josh Allen is just a cheat code and will give you a fighting chance. I don't think they're going to make a very deep playoff run, and I think they're kind of in a retooling year. But I do think they win the AFC East. And obviously, kind of like the Chargers, you have to ask who's going to step up at receiver. Now that Stephon Diggs is gone, Gabe Davis is gone, somebody's got to come in and take those snaps. Could it be Dalton Kincaid? I hope so. I love Dalton Kincaid. Um, will James Cook advance to a higher level of play and become a more dynamic running back? I don't know, but it's an important question to ask. And what are they doing in the secondary in Buffalo? Because Kyer Elam has not really worked out. Obviously, Tre'Davious White is gone. I know they have Rasul Douglas back there, who had a decent year, but the secondary is definitely a concern with Buffalo. But for now, I do have them in the fourth position. In third, I have a 12-5 record for the Houston Texans. I've seen on Twitter recently a couple of people seem to be doubting the Texans out of nowhere. Um, I absolutely do believe that CJ Stroud is going to continue to become a staple in the NFL, continue his ascension as a player, and become really, really good. Um, I think that part of that is part of the reason they brought in Stephon Diggs is to have kind of a mentor to these young receivers, John Mechie, Tank Dell, Nico Collins. I'm not, too worried that Stephon Diggs will be the number one option. I think he was very clearly brought in to be the number two and to make sure that Tank Dell and John Mechie have time to continue rehabbing and stay healthy and all of that. But I do believe wholeheartedly that CJ Stroud is going to be amazing next year. I also believe that Danielle Hunter was probably the greatest signing of the entire offseason. And while I do think Danielle sort of slowed down very slightly last year, despite having career high numbers almost across the board. Part of that is just because the second pass rusher in Minnesota was god awful. But now he's on a team that also has Will Anderson, and he has not had a player across from him of that skill level in years. So he doesn't have to be double teamed anymore. It's a much higher opportunity. What am I trying to say? There's much more opportunities for him to flash now that he's kind of not maybe the number one guy in Houston that teams have to worry about. That is going to be an absolutely absurd pass rush. Now, the linebackers are kind of worrying. I can't remember if they were the ones that went and traded for Ernest Jones from LA. I'd have to go back and check, but still, I think that Danielle Hunter signing is amazing. And then finally, their run game should be better, on paper at least. So that'll open up a much more dynamic offense, and that's always a good thing. So the Houston Texans, number 3. Number 2, of course, is going to be the Kansas City Chiefs. The biggest question, of course, the biggest narrative point is who's stopping them. Okay, that is the be-all, end-all of the Chiefs, is who is going to stop them. I don't think there's many teams that can. So that's question number 1. Question number 2, which is slightly less important now that they went and got Xavier Worthy, in my opinion, is are we going to see a regression from Travis Kelce? I think we did last year a little bit. That's why they sort of saved him for the end of the year and the playoff push. Is because he's getting older. He's 35, 36. You just can't put him out there for the same amount of snaps anymore. And I don't think they have a great backup plan in place right now. So they're going to have to be more creative about it. But Xavier Worthy should absolutely soften the blow there. And, of course, what are the rest of the receivers going to look like? Hollywood Brown is hurt. Not that I care, because I don't think Hollywood Brown is any good. Rashee Rice, all the offseason stuff going on with him, who knows? But I think Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy is that's a very dangerous combo to have given to the Kansas City Chiefs. But I do have them as the second seed, and the only reason they're the second seed with a 14-3 record is because I have them losing week 1 to the team I have in first. So let's get to that. Of course, the team I have in first is the Baltimore Ravens. I think Baltimore was the best team in the league last year. Obviously, they couldn't finish the job in the the AFC Championship game. I think they absolutely would have demolished the Niners in the Super Bowl had they made it there. But I think going into this year, as much as I think Kansas City improved this offseason, they had a great offseason, I still think Baltimore is better overall. I think Roquan Smith is absolutely bonkers. Justin Madubuike, now known as Nnamdi Madubuike, is a very underrated defensive tackle. He's not on the level of Chris Jones, but he is very good. Their secondary should be incredible now that they have Nate Wiggins, who is a rookie that the more I watched of him over the offseason, the more I have become invested in seeing how his career pans out. So I think the Baltimore Ravens are definitely the overall best team in the league. They are my Super Bowl favorite. Personally, I have them going up against the Rams in the Super Bowl. I have them winning the Super Bowl. And some key things with the Ravens is that Zay Flowers is by far the best wide receiver Lamar has ever had. So having a player of that caliber, I think that absolutely unlocks a whole new game to Baltimore that they never really had before. And yes, last year, he didn't really have the kind of season that you would want. But I think a lot of that is just, first year jitters. I think he will take a massive jump in year 2. The second thing is simply, can Derrick Henry stay healthy? I think that's very important. Can some of the backups stay healthy? Because for some reason, Baltimore just can't keep their running backs in one piece. So I think it's very important that they sort of manage the workload a little bit of Derrick Henry. Sort of do what the Chiefs did last year with Travis Kelce, where you don't really use him much in like the first 6 weeks. And then finally, of course, is how high is their ceiling? Can they win the game that matters at the end of the year? Again, I think they're the best team in the league. I don't know if it's close. It's closer than I think it was last year, but sometimes the best team in the league doesn't win the Super Bowl. We've seen that before. So I think Baltimore is incredible. I think they're winning the Super Bowl, and yeah, that's the video. It's not exactly the video I wanted it to be, just because I've been so sick. But if you enjoyed, well, of course you know what to do. I thank you as always for watching, and hopefully I'll be feeling better soon, and I can bring you guys the content that I want to be working on instead of taking copious amounts of cold medicine and throat lozenges and sleeping. So yeah, anyways, I hope to speak with you all again soon, and goodbye for now.